And so let's open our Bibles and we're going to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 6. 2 Samuel chapter 10, right? And we'll go from verse 6 all the way down to the end of the chapter, right? And we dealt with the first part of this chapter last week, okay? And where we did, okay, talked about the subject of fear and mistrust, okay? And then this evening, we're going to be talking about compounding bad decisions, okay? And so let's do, before we get into that, a very quick recap of last week and what we dealt with. Okay, and we were in a situation where David discovered the death of King Nahash, who was the king, okay, among the Ammonites, okay, and he died. His son became the next king and took over. All right, and then so David, as a friend, right, of King Nahash, who had helped him in the past, right, decided that he was going to send his condolences and to comfort, right, okay, Nahash's son, and to, just again to extend that hand of friendship, to be a friend, and all of us, ought to be ready to be there to comfort those that weep and mourn, right, to extend the hand of friendship at a time where people are most prone to actually feel that they are alone. Okay, and no one, example, David among all the people will understand in particular what it's like to be a young king, right? To be someone who's young and then thrust into a position of authority, and on how to conduct himself wisely in that kind of situation. And when you think about this, David was trying to be a friend to this young king. But there was the harboring of mistrust by the princes, right, who said, don't trust David. His men came here. They obviously have some ulterior motive. They're trying to spy out our weaknesses because they're going to take advantage of this situation where we're weak, where we're down, where we're going through this difficult time, and to attack us and to conquer us. So, do not trust him. Okay, now, and we talked about how at the root of all this is this issue and problem of fear, right? And when people are fearful, anything that someone does, right, any gesture, any even any show of friendliness, right, gets misinterpreted as something else. Okay, I remember one time I remember messaging someone, all right, and just saying, hey, hi, how are you? How are things? And then basically the reply was, why? It's like, why do you ask? What do you want to know? What for? Why and there are always going to be some people who are that way. Okay, God forbid that people in church are going to be that way. All right, but I found many times those that are that way and who are fearful, especially on Sundays, not that are fearful of what they say, what they think, what other people think, whatever. It's good to check one thing. All right, are you in the most holy faith? All right, do you have the assurance of salvation? All right, because this is not characteristic, all right, of someone who is born again. Because right, we walk, okay, now in the confidence and in the assurance that God gives to us, right? Not because we're very sure or certain of ourselves, right? And there is nothing we ought to take confidence in, because we all live in this body of flesh, right? And accept that God is able to use us, and that He is, He has saved us, and He's sanctifying us. There's nothing good about us. Okay, but the thing is this: fear will lead to mistrust, right? And the problem with mistrust is this, right? It erodes, it chips away, it eats away at the foundation of any relationship. And so, because of this fear and mistrust, what happened was this: one thing led to another. All right, things snowballed, and the king decided, King Hanun decided that it was a good idea to humiliate David's servants. Right, he cut off half their beards. Imagine, only half of the beard was left, and then the other half is missing. Right, and then cut off their clothes. right? Such that this now basically the hem of their clothing, right, is in the middle of the buttocks. Okay, this is notice it's higher than even a mini skirt. All right, if you imagine as indecent and immodest a short mini skirt can be. Now, King Hanun cut their skirts, right, in the clothings, right, such that it was even higher than that, and then he sent them home. Okay, and obviously they were embarrassed, right, to be seen back in their own country by their own countrymen, and so they were hiding in Jericho. And word got out to David. David sent his men to investigate to find out what was really going on, what had happened, right? And then because of that, right, once he knew about what was going on, now he to protect, all right, these men, all right, and then bearing in mind the humiliation and the embarrassment, now he told them to remain there, right, in Jericho until, okay, the beards grew back, and then from there they would come back. Now, okay, now you try to picture what King Hanun did, right? Because a beard in that culture, okay, was something sacred, was something very personal, very sacred, right? It is a mark of wisdom, maturity, a mark of respect. It is also a mark of authority. And I think one other thing very obvious is, it is an indicator, right, especially in the Middle Eastern culture, or that of the manliness of a person. All right, so what King Hanun did was to basically emasculate these men, right, and then to embarrass and humiliate them, in such a way that it would be months, okay, quite a while before they could be seen in public. Now, we talked about how all this, right, and this hurt and all these damage is caused by suspicion and mistrust, and this goes all the way back, right, even to the Garden of Eden, okay, where the serpent in the garden seeded these seeds of doubt and mistrust, that God does not have man's interest at heart, and so the idea was to prompt Adam and his wife, right, to act independently of God for fear, right? Even though, now, because if you trust someone, it doesn't matter if you know or you do not know everything, all right, about what they want to say or what they intend to do, right? If you trust them, you trust them. Okay? But what happened was this, that in seeding the doubt and mistrust, it came to that Adam and his wife decided that it was better for them to be armed with the knowledge of good and evil, armed with the ability to make their own independent decisions, independent of God, why lest whatever God did was not in their best interest, right? That's why be very careful when people, okay, say this, like God help those who help themselves, okay? Because the thing that the serpent tempted, right, Adam and his wife with was not the issue wasn't knowledge, it was self-reliance, independence from God, right? And you don't need him anymore. Okay, that was the beginning of humanism, right? Man decides truth. Man is the master of his own destiny. Okay, and so on and so forth. And so now, what we have now is a serious problem that brewed up, okay, between the Ammonites and Israel. So what's going to happen, right? And so we come to this evening's lesson where we talk about, okay, now when you make a bad decision, what do you do? Because one of the big problems that we see even today is that when people make a bad decision, example, they've invested, right, poorly, let's say, and they made a bad decision financially. But what do? To rescue themselves out of the situation, they compound the decision. They make it worse, right? They throw more money in when they ought to actually make a decision to pull out, right? To get out of the situation. They actually fully commit themselves even deeper than before. Okay, and now in this case, it was a bad decision, right? Frankly, the one thing to do would have been to apologize, to seek forgiveness, right? A soft answer is what will turn away wrath. But what happened? They decided, since we did this already, I think they decided, let's just go all the way, right? They initiated a hostile action and they decided, let's go to war, right? I mean, think about this. How does that even make sense? Okay, but let's go to verse 6, and you see that there was the hiring of the Syrians, right, by Ammon. Verse 6, and when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, right, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Berephop and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 footmen, and of King Maachah, 1,000 men, and of Ishtop, 12,000 men. Now, Berephop, okay, now these are mercenaries that they hired, okay, 20,000 of them, okay, from Zobah, and what else? 1,000 of them from King Maachah, right? This was a region inside of Israel, but was actually occupied by the Maachahites. And then 12,000 from Ishtop. Now, Ishtop was the place that Jephthah had fled to, right, in the book of Judges, and is also known as Tob, right, T-O-B for short. Okay, Judges 11 verse 3 tells us, then Jephthah fled from his brethren and dwelt in the land of Tob, and there were gathered vain men to Jephthah and went out with him. Now, the action of the Ammonites, right, basically made them odious in the sight of David. In other words, it stank. Okay, this was so bad. They realized, David, there's no way, or at least in their thinking, there was no way that you can salvage this situation. So might as well just go to war. Right? Now, here is a situation where basically they realize, right, the reality sinks in, and now they realize what they have done. Okay, it may have been funny at the time, right? Humiliating people always seems funny at the moment. Okay, it always seems like a nice idea. Now, they realize that they may have gone too far, and there was no turning back. Okay, and in particular, when it came to a man like David, now maybe they may have underestimated David, right? He was still a relatively young king, right? But here's the danger. Okay, do not provoke, right, good men. They may be gentle, right? They may be non-aggressive by nature, but there is a danger of provoking someone, right, by going too far. And and don't be surprised that when good men are forced to stand up, right, to aggressors, right, to oppressors. And what they did was basically to provoke a sleeping giant. Okay, just think about it this way. Just because someone is self-restrained, okay, someone is exercising self-control and restraint, right, and is holding back his anger, doesn't mean that they're weak. Yes, I know that's how the world sees it, all right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're weak. Okay, and it will be a very serious mistake. The world sees this as weakness, but realize this, showing restraint requires strength. Okay, but this is not something that the world understands, right? Because they only understand power. Look at Matthew chapter 20, verse 25 to 28. Now Jesus points this out to the disciples, but Jesus called them unto him and said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. Right, now you notice the word dominion it means to bring under power, right, to subjugate. Now the Syrians and the people of this world, the way of this world, the philosophy of this world is such that it only respects power and the power or influence that money can buy for you. Okay, and so David was a very different man, right? Man after God's own heart. And By the way, we ought to be like him. Now, verse 26 tells us, but it shall not be so among you. Okay, so the Lord Jesus Christ points out, okay, that's not how it's supposed to be among his saints. All right, he says, but whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. What does that word mean? Servant. All right, to minister is to serve. All right, and whosoever will be chief among you, all right, whoever wants to be the highest ranking, let him be your servant. Okay, why is that the case? Look at the example that was given to us. Verse 28, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. Okay, so Christ came for a purpose, and it is not to be served hand and foot, but rather to minister, to serve others, and then notice, and to lay down his life for others, and to give his life a ransom for many. Now, but as I mentioned just now, that there comes a time good men, right, good honest men need to stand up against bullies, against aggressors. Why? Not because we like fighting, we like to tangle with people, but simply because we need to protect our people, right? To protect our friends and family. And most of all, we stand up for the truth and for our God and our Savior. Okay? Because we need to take courage to do these things and to stand up for something. Okay? The sad part today is this modern Christianity, okay, and the corrupt culture, okay, that we're seeing in many churches is this. Nobody wants to take a stand for anything. Okay? And why? Because they will hold up to you this fake Jesus that is an invention of man's own imagination that, oh, you see, he's so nice, he's so sweet, he's never controversial, he never takes a stand on anything, he's effeminate, he's got no spine, no backbone, he's everything to everyone, he's a man pleaser. Search the scriptures, you're not going to find that kind of Jesus there. Right? Remember, he's the one who overturned tables, right, in the temple. All right, who chased the money changers out of the temple. He was not afraid to confront the Pharisees and the scribes who are right in their faces and told them, you all of you are what? Venomous snakes, vipers. Right? He referred to what? Wolves. And realize this, that the Lord Jesus Christ, he gave his life for the sake of others. He's not afraid to take a stand, right? And he's never afraid to be controversial, right? But not for the sake of courting, trying to to get attention from people. Okay, he's never attention seeking. Now, they decided to go to war against Israel. And like I said, this was a bad decision. And here is a case of making a bad decision on top, building that bad decision on top of an already bad decision, compounding the error. Think about this. Israel under David was at the height of their military strength, right? There was a growing empire, and so this whole situation is not going to end well for them. Now, I want to, before we can move on to the actual battle, we need to talk a bit about the haunting by an old failure. All right, why do I say that? Because here, the king of Masha mobilized his forces against Israel. And when you go back into the scriptures, all right, further back, earlier on in the Old Testament, you're going to see that the Maccabeites, okay, are not new. They've shown up before. All right, turn with me to Joshua 13, verse 11 and 13. It says, and Gilead and the border of Geshurites and Maccabeites and all Mount Hermon and all Bashan unto Salcah. Now, that was actually the territory that they were supposed to occupy, right? But what happened? Look at verse 13. Nevertheless, the children of Israel expelled not the Geshurites nor the Maccabeites, but the Geshurites and the Maccabeites dwell among the Israelites until this day. So what happened? There was a failure to obey God, who had already told them, this land belongs to you, occupy it, right? You have to conquer it. I will give you the victory, but you have to labor to conquer it. And what happened was this. They failed to expel these people. They became a thorn in the side of Israel. Now, okay, this is centuries later, it comes to bite them, right? Bite them on the behind. And when you look at the book of Judges, okay, the book of Joshua, you're going to see it pictures the victorious life, right, in Christ. But it also warns us about the seeds of problems that we can plant when we neglect to go for total victory in our lives, right? Where there was the prospect, the potential, and the possibility, right, of a decisive victory. Israel, in certain cases, chose not to pursue it, right? Chose to do nothing. And then what happened was this lack of action came back to bite them down the road. Okay, and I think in terms of spiritual application, we would do well to remember there are things that as we obey the Lord in His word, right, and by the help of the Holy Spirit, now we are able to overcome. Go for total victory. Don't hold back. Because when we hold back, whatever is lingering is going to come back. It's like many times when the doctors attack a cancer in the body, there is the danger that if they don't go all out, what happens that the cancer will hide, will go somewhere else, it will hide somewhere, and it will come back with a vengeance. Right? It's going to come back much more aggressive than before unless you attain total victory. Now, we'll move on to the next part. All right, and verse 7, we see the host of Israel mobilized. Now, and when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the hosts of the mighty men. Okay, so David got word about what was going to happen. He mobilized the entire military. He got all his men ready and to go to war because this was a dangerous time for Israel. Why? Because the Ammonites could attack. Now, the Ammonites today, okay, that area, that location, Ammon, it sounds like Amman, right? Which is now in the nation of Jordan today. Okay, and that's on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, and so they mobilize, okay, to attack and to get ready. And interestingly, till today, over the last few decades, you will see where Israel has had to fight a war, it was with the same enemies, right? Jordan, Syria, Egypt. Okay, and so this is actually seems like a recurring pattern. Now, we see the huge forces that are mobilized, okay, against Joab. Now look at verse 8 to 10. And the children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array at the entering of the gate. So basically, they went out there, okay, Israel went out, okay, to meet them in battle. And the children of Ammon came out and basically just outside of the gate of their city, right? And they put themselves into battle formation, right? And then guess what? Israel now discovers, okay, they are not just facing the enemy, right, Ammon, but there are other participants in the battle, right? It says, and the Syrians of Zobah and of Rehob and of Ishtar and Makkah were by themselves in the field. Okay, so now there were two groups, right? In other words, instead of facing the enemy head on, right, Joab now finds himself that he actually has to split his attention because there are two flanks in this battle that he has to deal with. He cannot just ignore the Syrians because that could pose a grave danger to them, right? You never leave an open flank unguarded. You have to make sure that you know how to meet the enemy if they attack on that flank. Now, according to First Chronicles, right, Okay, First Chronicles chapter 19, verse 7. Okay, you're going to see here it says, so they hired 32,000 chariots and the king of Maachah and his people and came and pitched before Medeba. Right? So take note of that name, Medeba. And the children of Ammon gathered themselves together from their cities and came to battle. So they found themselves surrounded front and back. Okay, and here this battle would take place at the city of Medeba, which is an Ammonite city, right, on the border of the Ammonites, the land of the Ammonites, and with Israel. Okay, now we see this on the map. Okay, and so this was very close by, right, from Jerusalem. Now they crossed over, all right, and over to Medeba. Okay, and the battle is there just before the gates of the city. Okay, and so they were to clash there. Okay, so we'll move on, and so we see the forces that were against David. Now, before we get to our next point, I just want to mention a bit about this location, right? Medeba is known. Okay, now Medeba is okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. All right. Anyway, Medeba is known as, it means waters of quiet, right? It's an ancient town in Moab. Now, one of the things that may seem confusing will be that when you look at the map, right, Moab and Ammon are very closely related. Okay, and in fact, sometimes it almost seems like when you talk about the king, it's interchangeable. Why? Because they are related, actually, they're cousins. Okay, going all the way back to Lot, right? And these were the children of Lot, the sons of Lot. Okay, now look at Numbers chapter 12, verse 29 to 30. It says, woe unto thee, Moab, thou art undone, O people of Chemosh. Right, for he had given his sons that escaped and his daughters into captivity unto Sihon, the king of the Amorites. We have shot at them, right? Heshbon is perished even unto Dibon, and we have laid them waste even unto Nopah, which reaches, notice, unto Medeba. Okay, Joshua 13, verse 15 to 16. And Moses gave unto the tribe of the children of Reuben inheritance according to their families, and their coast was from Aroer, which is on the bank of the river Arnon, and the city that is in the midst of the river, and all the plain of Medeba. Okay, notice that land was actually given as an inheritance to the tribe of Reuben. Okay, but you're going to see that they never fully claimed that. Okay, you see, what God can promise and give to us, it's still something that we need to take, step up and to take. Okay, and Israel did not do that, right, during the time of Joshua and then into the time of the judges. Now, concerning this battle, right, back to 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 9, when Joab saw that the front of the battle was against him before and behind. All right, so now Joab now realizes he's surrounded, right? He's out in front there, the children of Ammon and their walled defensive city, and then behind him are the Syrians. What are we going to do? All right, now they have to fight front and back. And so he makes a decision, right, and to deal with the situation. Okay, realize this, that now, where you and I face issues in life, you can go into a situation like this with your plans, but realize plans, okay, when they meet with reality, may require the plans to be revised. Okay, you may have to improvise, you may have to modify the plan, right? Stubbornly insisting on the plan in this case, is going to get you killed. Why? Because it's not simply out of sync with reality. It's not going to work. Okay? And so Joab makes a decision that he's going to have to modify his battle plan. And here's what he comes up with, right? Look at verse 9. He chose of all the choice men of Israel and put them in array against the Syrians. Okay, so what happened? Verse 10, and the rest of the people he delivered into the hand of Abishai, his brother, that he might put them in array against the children of Ammon. Okay, now, so try to picture this. The two sides, all right? This is the city and the children of Ammon, and these are the Syrians, and Israel is in between. Now, if the Syrians were to charge and to come in, what's going to happen? The forces of Israel are going to get crushed in between. The two sides are just going to close in on them and finish them off. Okay? Potentially disastrous. So what does he do? Now, Joab decides, right? He picks an elite but smaller force, right? He picks the best men, okay, throughout the entire force. And then what happens? He puts them against the, against the Syrians. Okay? These are elite men. It's a smaller force, right? And he knows, okay, this is not going to be an easy fight. But what does he do? He picks the very best, right? He directs them against this force of the Syrians. And then what happens? The numerically larger group of Israelites, right now, he put them under the command of Abishai, his brother. Okay, so the bulk of the forces are against the children of Ammon. Now, he considered this. Few points maybe that ran through his head, right? One, maybe the Ammonites are not as good in battle as the Syrians, which is why it makes sense, because that's why they hired the Syrians to help them to fight. They lacked the confidence. They knew that they were not going to be able to stand up against the Israelites. So what happened? They brought in reinforcements, right? They hired others. Now, knowing that that was the case, he decides, right, send in the larger force with his brother in command, right, to exploit their lack of confidence. Meanwhile, what's going to happen is this. Joab and his very small band of elite soldiers, okay, basically think of it this way. They're like the special forces. They're going to hold the Syrians for as long as possible. Bog them down, render them ineffective. Why? Because they cannot reach the Ammonites. Okay, they cannot close this gap. As long as they cannot close this gap, right, Israel is safe. Okay, now the idea here, in other words, is that Joab is not going for a victory against the Syrians. He's going to try to hold them for as long as possible, delay them, inflict as much damage as possible, right? Just make it very difficult for them to be effective. And if that is the case, by distracting them, now, they are not going to be able to be of much help to the children of Ammon, right? Meanwhile, his brother with the bulk of their force is going to focus their resources, right? And then to go after the children of Ammon and then to basically finish this, right? Because once the children of Ammon are finished, now it's going to be over. Why? Because as far as the Syrians are concerned, this is not their war. They just hired them for a fight. Okay? Win or lose, they get paid. Okay? And so, now, so when you consider this, now there was a question, okay? There's a risk, right? What if Joab's group was overrun by the enemy? What then? Okay, remember, Joab's group is a very small force. Okay, but very, very strong force because they're very valiant men. They are very, these are all veterans. They are very competent in battle. Okay, but what if they are in danger of being overrun? What then? Because that could be a dangerous situation. Well, so we come to verse 11 and 12 because here we see the mutual help rendered in battle. Now, so Joab's plan was this, that should they run into trouble, then Abishai's men will come to their rescue to reinforce them right, to extract them so that they can disengage from this battle, right? Because if you cannot disengage, what's going to happen is this. You can't run. If you can't get away, they're going to eventually beat you down, finish everyone off. Okay? And so in verse 11, verse 11 onwards, he says this. And he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But if the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I will come and help thee. Be of good courage, let us play the men for our people and for the cities of our God, right? And the Lord do that which seemeth him good. Now, everything's at stake, because if they lose this battle, right, the majority of the forces in Israel will destroy. What's going to happen is the rest of the nation is wide open. That's why he says, be of good courage, let us play the men for our people. Why did he say that? It's basically telling Abishai, look, we need to be men, right? We need to step up. Okay, this is a challenge. Men cannot be cowardly, especially at a time like this. They cannot be thinking about self-preservation. They have to think about what about others. And we step up to our responsibility in a time like this, right? And soldiers cannot be, cannot be scaredy cats. Okay, he says, let's play the men for, the sake of our people. And then not only that, and for the cities of our God, right? Because if they lose this battle, you can be sure of one thing, the Syrians and the Ammonites are going to sweep into Israel and to occupy their cities. So this is not just one battle. This is, they have to win this overall as a war for the future peace and safety of Israel, right? And the idea here was this. We will do our part and we're going to have to depend on God for the rest, right? And the Lord do that which seemeth him good. Okay, the will of God. But they will do their part right now. And so they're going to mutually reinforce each other. All right, there is no reserve force here. Okay, basically, if either side is in trouble, they're going to send for help, and then they're going to fight together. Now, and this makes sense because you have one enemy in the front while the other is at the back. In other words, the enemies, as long as they can hold this position, they can divide the enemy into two. Right? The enemy cannot reinforce each other. The Syrians cannot come to the aid of the Ammonites as long as Israel is holding the middle ground, all right, and then defending these front and rear flanks, right? So the Ammonites and the Syrians, now because of this, they cannot communicate with each other. They can't reinforce each other. But the risk and danger to Israel is this: it's possible to get sandwiched, right? So, but what they decided to do is this: if there is a danger of one flank collapsing, they are going to combine their forces and they're going to basically launch a concerted attack on one side so that one side of the enemy flank could collapse. Okay, now, this principle of mutually helping one another, right, supporting each other, is something that we need to do well to consider. And we see this being done elsewhere, right? Look at Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 19 and 20. It says, and I said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, notice this, in rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, right? Nehemiah tells them this: the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. Okay, there is, and they're trying to rebuild this wall, but they're separated, they're scattered all around, okay, far from each other. And so he says, but there is a need to be vigilant. Why? Because they could come under attack. So he tells them, in what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us, our God shall fight for us, right? And so it says, should anything happen, they're going to blow the trumpet, they're going to sound the alert and the warning, and everyone will come back to the rallying and assembly point, where then they are going to organize themselves against a possible attack. Now, so why did Joab do this? Simply, when you and I, right, picture this, right? Whether it's a small, young church, it's a mission work where there are limited resources, right? We are outnumbered, where we are limited number of people. What do? Focus our resources. You don't spread them thin all over the place. You focus them in the area where they can make the most impact, right? To make the most difference, okay? Where they can be effective. And notice how Joab did this, right? He picked the best men, right? Formed a smaller force. But because these are very, very solid, very experienced, right? Strong fighting men, there is a multiplier effect. Imagine if he had, example, let's say if he had 1,000 of these. Now, there could be a 5 times, 6 times multiplier effect. Okay, so what happens when you have, okay, good people, you put them where they can function in a specialized capacity where all their best abilities could be put to use. And think about this, it is very wise, okay, for us to pick our battles. Not every fight is important. Right? It may seem urgent, but not everything is important. Pick our battles. And notice another principle, unifying ourselves against an enemy rather than to allow ourselves to be divided, or to be, another way of being divided is being distracted, right, by all sorts of concerns around us. Okay, now Romans chapter 15 verse 1 and 2 tells us, right, we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak. All right, so you see, even spiritually, as brethren, what do? There's teamwork. We bear burdens for one another. Right, someone's has an infirmity or there's weak in the area. We assist, and not to please ourselves. Right, because it's not about us; it's about others. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. Right? We do this for the sake of building each other up. Right? Galatians 6 verse 2. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Right? Philippians 1 verse 27 tells us this. Only let your conversation be as it becometh the gospel of Christ, that whether I come and see you, or else be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that ye stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. Right? Notice, coming together, striving together. If there's to be strive, it is to be against the same, right? Against the same obstacles, right? Towards the shared goal, rather than what do we often see, even among brethren in churches, they strive against one another. Okay, we ought to be striving towards the same goal, right? It says for the faith of the gospel, right? Are there enemies? Yes. It says, and in nothing terrified by your adversaries, right? And he's telling that to a church that's facing persecution, which is to them an evident token of perdition, but to you of salvation and that of God. So he points out, all right, why are they facing these trouble, the opposition, all that? He says, well, it's because, one, the adversaries are not saved. Secondly, trouble is coming to them because of their salvation, because they are saved. Right? And that's why the world is hostile towards them. So what happens now? Okay, as they now engage and they close into battle, okay, something very interesting happens. We see the hasty retreat by the Syrians. Verse 13, and Joab drew nigh, right, and the people that were with him onto the battle against the Syrians. But what happens? And they fled before him. All right, remember, Joab and his numerically inferior force went to battle against the Syrians. What happened? The Syrians turned and they ran for their lives. Now, realize this. only God is able to make this kind of thing happen. And Leviticus chapter 26, verse 7 and 8 tells us God did promise to Israel that if they were to obey him, follow him, that he alone can make this kind of thing happen. Right? Leviticus 26, verse 7, and ye shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. Now, what was this? Is it by their skill? No, this is by God's promise. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight, and your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. Now, over and over again, God promised that this can happen, and it would do this, right? And battle after battle, this has happened. Why? Not because they deserve it, not because they have better tactics and strategy, better weapons or technology, but because God promised this, right? This was accomplished not by the force and the power of their military, but by the power of God, right? The very power of God. And so we have to be very mindful. And by the way, it affects also our gratitude, our thankfulness towards God. Okay, and so we're going to quickly just move on to the next part here. Okay, and try to wrap up now. So we see because of this, the retreat by the Syrians. Now, the next thing that happens, we see the hiding of the Ammonites. Now, verse 14, and when the children of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fled, okay, then fled they also before Abishai. Okay, so Joab with a smaller force charges towards the Syrians. The Syrians turn, they run. Okay, they became disorganized. They all fled in all directions. Now what happens? The children of Ammon now face Abishai. And when Abishai comes, what happens? They then fled they also before Abishai and entered into the city. So they retreated back into through the gates. They shut the gates. And then basically behind they now were hiding there inside the walls of their own city. Well, I guess nobody is interested in having a battle, so there's nothing else to do. Right? So Joab returned from the children of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. Right? So the Ammonites saw the Syrians retreated with hardly a fight. The Ammonites retreated into their own city for defense. Guess what? I guess today we're not going to go to battle. So Joab returned to Jerusalem right after this engagement because there's nothing else to do. And so now you would think that that's it, right? I mean, case closed. Well, apparently not, because we see the huddling of the Syrians for battle. Verse 15 and verse 16. And when the Syrians saw that they were smitten before Israel. So this word here tells us that apparently there was some contact with the enemy, all right, and Syrians were killed. They were smitten before Israel. But they're still smarting from their wounds. They're not happy about the situation, and they decided, you know what, we're going to go to war. Right? So when they saw that they were smitten before Israel, they gathered themselves together, and Hadarezer sent and brought out the Syrians that were beyond the river, and they came to Helam, and Shobak, the captain of the host of Hadarezer, went before them. Now, very quickly, this was a humiliating and embarrassing defeat for the Syrians. They were hired to go to battle against Israel, but what happened? They ran for their lives. Okay? Now, it's going to be very hard to live this down. You can be sure other countries are going to know about this. And what's going to happen? It's going to make them look weak, right? It's going to open up the possibility they could be attacked by some other country because they smell weakness, they smell blood. So what happens now? It made them look very bad, right? And in other words, and people are talking about it. The nations around have heard about this. They're talking about this, right? So they need to, okay, now this is the trap that pride can set for us. Because here, they can't just let this thing slide. They have to do something to redeem themselves. They have to do something to make themselves look good. You see the problem? So the king of Syria, now previously, those forces that assembled were Syrians, right? But these were under, city or regional kings. But there is one king overall over them, and he's the king of Syria. And Hadarezer now says, you know what? I'm going to mobilize everyone. And then he's going to send his chief commander, right, Shobak. Okay, previously, those commanders were small fry. Now we're going to mobilize the whole national army, and we're going to go to war with Israel. So he mobilizes everyone. And what happens? Remember, we're talking about the problem of compounding a bad decision. It was a bad decision. Guess what? How to redeem themselves, how to make themselves look good, how to come out of this in a better situation. As far as the Syrians were concerned, they figured, well, we'll chase that bad decision with one more bad decision, but we're going to up the stakes, we're going to bet even more heavily. Right? You see this with gamblers. Okay, they've lost a lot of money, but guess what? Okay, they managed to somehow borrow a whole lot of money, and then they say, okay, I'm going to just bet everything. I bet the whole farm now, right? So that I can redeem the loss. Okay, and it's very foolish. Instead of cutting losses, he decides, let's compound this. So look at verse 17, right? Because now we see the hellish defeat of the Syrians. Verse 17, and it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and passed over Jordan and came to Helam. Right? So both sides are moving towards this city, right? This location, Helam, and they're going to have a pitched battle there. Right? David gets news about this. He gathers all the forces. This is an all-out battle. He brings everything with him. He crosses aggressively across Jordan, comes to Helam, and then what happens? And there it says, and the Syrians set themselves in array against David and fought with him. Okay, so they fight with him there. And what happens? Verse 18, and the Syrians fled before Israel. Does that sound familiar? And David slew of the men 700 chariots of the Syrians and 40,000 horsemen, and smote Shobak and the captain of their host who died there. And when all the kings that were servants to Hadarezer saw they were smitten before Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. So the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon anymore. Okay, now we're going to see this map here. Now, what happens? Here, you're going to notice that, the previous battle was directly to the east of Jerusalem at Medeba. Now, this is northeast, further up, right? And this is now in Syrian territory, in Helam. And what happens is, you notice David moves very aggressively up there. Okay? He goes up there very aggressively, sends his forces up into battle. Okay, and what's going to happen now is this. The Syrians were, again, very soundly defeated. Okay? Right, this hellish defeat. Now, what happens? It was a decisive victory over Syria. Now, this wasn't just a few Syrian units anymore. The entire national army was out there, the largest force that the Syrians could mobilize, and they were soundly defeated, right? 700, chariots. Okay, each chariot will have a team of men and a commander, right? And the horses. And what happens? They were killed. Okay, in other words, you think of this, let's say if there are 3 or 4 men per chariot, right? Out of the 700, let's say times 4, 700 times 4. Okay, so what happens? You got a few thousand men that were just killed. Okay, this is the equivalent today. The chariot would have been the equivalent of a tank today. Okay, and then 40,000 cavalrymen were killed. Okay, now these are huge losses consisting of both men, right, commanders, and leaders take more time to train, and they actually require years of experience, right, in order to lead well. And then what happens? Horses were lost, equipment was lost. Now, to make it worse, the worst thing was the highest commander that the Syrians had, okay, Shobak, was killed in action by David's men. Now, all this is being observed by the lords of the Syrian cities. Right? They saw how their forces were decimated. Many of them, they know of people, friends, and family that are not coming home. Okay? Now, they didn't wait for the king of Syria to make peace. They sued for peace with Israel immediately. Why? Because they know they lost this battle. Okay, the main bulk force of the Syrians was defeated and destroyed. There's nothing stopping Israel from overrunning their cities and occupying them. And so what did they do? They begged to negotiate for peace right now. Okay, before things got worse. Now, why was this a major turning point? You see here that it says they made peace with Israel and served them, so the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon anymore. Right? Syria would never again assist the Ammonites. Okay, why? Because they paid too high a price for getting involved in a matter that was not their concern. Okay, not only that, this battle was so decisive, it broke their resolve to fight against Israel, and so they negotiated for peace. Now, from this point on, what happened was this. They would now serve as servants to Israel, right, as tributaries, contributing to Israel's wealth. And this is the blessing that comes from defeating an enemy, right, especially a powerful enemy. Resources, internally, there are other benefits, right, because resources, time, and attention are no longer diverted to worrying about an external enemy, because right now, they're tributaries. They're no longer enemies, right? And now realize this. All this, okay, this lasting peace would not have happened if not for this trouble. Okay? I want us to think about the perspective here, because many times we look at this, that why must this happen? Why is this happening to us? Why did this, and we fail to see that maybe, when things escalate, right, from dealing, going to battle against the Ammonites, suddenly now they have to face a more powerful enemy, Syria. Now, God was in control. And because God was in control, what happened? He sets up a situation where the Syrians pull all the stops. They bring everything in, and God allows that to happen. Why? Because the Syrians will get defeated. They lose so much equipment, right, and so many horses and commanders that it was going to take them a long time to recover. In so doing, what happens? One, the Ammonites are too embarrassed to go to war. They're not going to cause Israel any more trouble. The Syrians are going to back off. They're not going to give Israel and David any more trouble. And because of that, what's going to come ahead is this, right? It's going to be, okay, at least from the north, east, and to the eastern side of Israel, there's going to be peace and quiet for quite some time to come. Okay? Now, but how did that come about? It was when things escalated. Okay, when the problem seemed to be too large. But can I say this? Because many times we are thinking we want to avoid the trouble. When it may be that God wants us to face the problems and the trouble directly. Okay, not alone, but with God's help. Okay, why? Because God is going to be the one that's going to wage the battle, not us. But in so doing, what's going to happen is this. If we would do that, and we'll face that head on with the strength and the power of God, and with His grace and with His help, okay, it's going to allow us to have a decisive, clear victory that's going to provide us with a smooth path for some time to come. Okay, or if we would work with God instead of running. Okay, because our natural tendency is this. We want to run, we want to hide. Okay, we look around, we see we have limited resources. These battles, Israel was actually outnumbered. Okay, they didn't have enough numbers. And yet, with God on their side, right? With God on your side and mine. Right? When we stand with the Lord in the direction that He wants us to go. Realize this, dearly beloved, we are going to be undefeatable, right? Will be unbreakable. Okay, don't ask, Lord, are you on my side or not? Ask yourselves this question. Are we on the Lord's side? Who is on the Lord's side? Because where you and I are on the Lord's side, you can be sure of one thing. He's not going to let us down. Right? And the victory will be ours. Right? God bless to us the reading of and the preaching of His word. And may we just consider and ponder these things. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you even for this time in the word.